You're listening to episode 35 of Literacy in Color. Today's guest is the incredible Amy Siracusano. Amy has worked in public education for over 25 years, serving in roles such as classroom teacher, learning specialist, Title I teacher, vice principal, literacy specialist, and even adjunct professor. She presents nationally on topics like assessment, dyslexia, reading, and writing, and she's a true champion for structured literacy. Amy is also deeply involved in literacy advocacy. She's a proud member of Decoding Dyslexia Maryland, serves on the board of directors for the Reading League, and is an Acadience training specialist. She even teaches in the Advanced Reading Science program at Brooklyn College. Her mission is simple but powerful: to ensure every child leaves second grade proficient in both reading and writing by equipping teachers with the knowledge they deserve. In today's episode, Amy and I dig deep into the importance of transcription skills, things like handwriting, spelling, keyboarding. We even chat about fine motor development and why these foundational pieces are critical for writing success. We explore how weaknesses in transcription impact students' cognitive load, executive functioning, and the ability to fully express themselves through writing. Amy shares both research and incredibly practical tips that every teacher needs to hear. Buckle up, because this episode is packed with insight and actionable takeaways you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. Today, you are in for a real treat because we are joined by the Amy Siracusano, and I am so excited to have her on the show today. I had the pleasure of seeing her present at the Reading League conference last October, and she is absolutely brilliant in so many ways. She then spoke about writing. I saw her present for a second time about writing at the Everyone Reading Conference in New York City. And again, Amy is so knowledgeable on so many things, but writing is a part of we say the science of reading, but really it's the science of literacy. It's a part that a lot of teachers need a lot of support in. And I think she just has so much knowledge to bring to the table. So today we're going to be chatting about the importance of transcription skills. But before we get into that, I just want to say hello and thank you for joining me, and welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me here. It truly is an honor to see you again through Zoom this time, and just to kind of share all of this learning that I'm gaining every single day and hoping to share with educators so that we can do a better job for our students. So thank you.
Of course. So for those of you who aren't familiar with you and all your brilliance, can you briefly introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background as it relates to the structured literacy and science of reading research?
Yeah, well, I definitely didn't start in this world, that's for sure. My journey began about 25 years ago, originally from Long Island, New York. And the first person that I learned about writing from was Lucy Calkins, because Teachers College was in my backyard, right? And so I knew nothing about teaching foundational writing skills or handwriting. I just kind of jumped into, let's write stories and let's write paragraphs and you can do this. And it didn't work out quite so well all the time. So from there, I moved to Maryland, where I've been for almost 20 years now, and learned from Carol Tolman with Letters Edition 1 way back in the day. So it's a long road. I've learned a lot along the way. I'm still learning every single day. And I'm just appreciative to be in this space. And I speak to Ginger Berninger quite often. She has become a friend of mine and confidant in terms of talking about her research around transcription and writing and literacy and all of her knowledge. So I lean on her work as I talk to educators about what the research says and what it means for our practice to get our writers where they need to be.
I love how you mentioned both of those names because actually last summer I went to Chicago for Lexia Letters Applied Conference, and Carol Tolman brought up Berninger's simple view of writing. And that was the first time I ever actually saw that because we're so familiar with the simple view of reading. We have our word recognition times language comprehension, giving us reading comprehension. And it's just such a nice, simple model to conceptualize what's happening in the brain. And then I saw the simple view of writing, and it was transcription skills times composition skills, and it's giving us skilled writing. And I was like, wow, that's great. But then here comes Amy Siracusano, and I see the not so simple view of writing. And I was like, well, this is fascinating and so much more nuanced and important information that I think every single teacher needs to know. So can you just we'll start with the big picture and you can walk us through the not so simple view of writing?
Sure, actually. So Virginia Berninger, Dr. Virginia Berninger, is the lead author on the simple view of writing developed in 2003 and the not so simple view of writing developed in 2006. Her first model might have been 2002. I might be misspeaking on that. The models are pretty similar, but the actual research that Virginia Berninger did actually does not have that multiplication sign in it, like a lot of the graphics that different organizations use to make that connection back to the simple view of reading. So the model looks like this, if you can just imagine. At the center and the core of everything is a triangle. And in the not so simple view of writing, it is called cognitive flow. That leans into working memory, long-term memory, short-term memory. So in other words, when we go to write about something, we really need to pull from our knowledge, what's sitting in that long-term memory. And then as we are thinking about what we're writing within that cognitive flow, what is it that we're going to review and revise? Even as I'm speaking to you today, right? I'll fumble on a word, I change things. So that's my cognitive flow at the center. I like to metaphorically think of that triangle as a volcano. And I want to keep that nice and dormant and nice and calm for kids. At the lower left-hand corner of the model is something called transcription, which we're going to dig into today. That is what we would refer to in the classroom probably as foundational writing skills, things like handwriting, keyboarding, spelling, spatial organization, use of margins, indenting, that sort of thing. At the top of the triangle is composition skills. Sometimes people might refer to these as written expression. This would be words, discourse, sentences. So again, a student really needs to now have some vocabulary about what it is they're talking about. They need to think about the structure of what that's going to look like and sound like, starting at the sentence level, and kind of formulate that together. All the while, that nice, calm volcano sitting at the center, that cognitive flow is working. The lower right-hand corner in the not so simple view of writing, this is where the biggest shift really occurred. And they added things like strategies for self-regulation and monitoring, like checklists, having the teacher keep a pulse on what's happening in the classroom, things like goal setting for kids, really important in writing. And so executive functioning in the lower right-hand corner is really, really critical in writing. And so for me, when I think about Dr. Berninger's research, I think about what is happening on the outside of this triangle, the outside of this volcano, this cognitive flow that's inhibiting children from really making their oral language come to life through print. So that's kind of the research behind what we need to think about, what we need to do in the classroom to make students successful.
That's so interesting. And it just shows you how many different things go into the writing process. And it's not just the actual act of writing. And oftentimes you think about writing workshop or, like you mentioned before, balanced literacy background, and it was about the content and the text generation part and show, not tell, sensory details. Let's expand volume, and all of these things. But there are so many other pieces to the puzzle that we have to take into consideration.
Yes, beautifully stated. Yeah, definitely is a puzzle that is sometimes more challenging than others to put together.
Yeah, definitely. And just juxtaposing back to reading. So often when we think about the reading models and the reading brain, we're imagining readings happening on your left hemisphere, and you have all of these processors activated to lift the words off the page and match the written symbols to the pronunciation into the meaning and all of those kinds of things. But what's happening in the writing brain? Are there any processes? The research will talk about different processes happening in the writing brain.
Yeah, so it's interesting what we know about when we actually put pen to paper or pencil to paper. We actually activate that reading brain. So when we are using our fine motor skills to hold a writing utensil and have the act of forming letters to form words, to form sentences, paragraphs, stories, whatever it might be, we are actually activating that phonological and that orthographic processor in the brain so that they are connecting. Because to be a skilled writer, we have to do everything we do in reading plus more, because writing is a production task. So that the act of handwriting is reinforcing, retraining, providing more practice for that reading brain to become more and more solid, more and more automatic. And it's very different from the act of keyboarding. So I'll just briefly mention this today. But the act of keyboarding, unlike handwriting, requires two hands to what we call touch type. That touch typing does not activate the reading brain in the same way that putting pen to paper does. And what the research tells us about this is that keyboarding, the act of touch typing, is actually not appropriate for children until about adolescence, around the age of 11, because the brain, both hemispheres have to communicate with each other in order to touch type. So it's not the reading brain that's being activated. It's kind of this myelination and this cross communication of both hemispheres. That's very difficult to do prior to the age of adolescence. Yet we have lots of states requiring typing of essays beginning in second or third grade, and it's completely inappropriate.
Wow. We need to rewind and listen to that part again because that's so important. We have kindergarteners on Chromebooks now, and I think computer teachers in the primary grades are trying to teach keyboarding. And just to know that that is not how the brain operates yet, we need to be putting that pen to paper, and that's what's really going to solidify the writing process. And keyboarding is just a whole nother layer of brain development.
Yeah, I wish, and maybe they'll hear this on your podcast, but our tech companies know about this reading science. They know about it. That's why they developed things like the original Microsoft Surface that folded backward, right? The keyboard and the computer, the laptop that folded backward and came with a stylus. You could write on the screen. It turned it into a Word document. I wish that our schools would allow kids and provide kids with some sort of a surface and a stylus where kids could write by hand their responses. Then technology could turn it into a Word document and states could score it however they need to score it based on their funding, et cetera. But if we have the research, why are we requiring kids to do one more thing that is really, when we go back to the research, that cognitive flow is going to cause possibly that volcano to erupt?
Yeah.
So it's a problem.
It's a real problem. And we think about our literacy crisis and the recent NAEP scores and the statistics in this world. When you say information like this, it makes you wonder, well, how much of it influenced by the content that we're putting in front of them and the way that they're able to deliver their knowledge? And if they're not able to deliver their knowledge in a way that's appropriate, then that's part of the issue as well.
Yes. Yeah. And it could be the issue. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When I saw you present, you mentioned we're all familiar with that cyclical writing process, how we're starting with pre-writing and we're drafting and revising and editing, and then we have this beautiful, beautiful piece. But you mentioned that that all assumes that students have transcription skills in place. So can you speak more to this?
Yeah, of course. So it's interesting. The writing process really came out of a study done in 1981 by Dr. Flower and Dr. Hayes. And again, I might be misquoting the other research. I'll think of that and I can provide that to you, Michelle, for sure. But it was a study done not on elementary school students. It was a study done on college age students. And they asked them what was happening for them as they were writing. And so they created this model, right? The schematic. And in that model, it's interesting. More than 20 years later, we see in Dr. Berninger's work in the simple view and the not so simple view of writing, we see evidence of this model that they developed on these college age students. So the model showed goal setting, showed working memory, long-term memory, and then it showed evidence of this process of like planning and drafting and reviewing, revising. But the arrows were not linear. It was not one step, then the next step. It kind of went bi-directional, right? In both directions. And if we think about it, for those of us who are adults, or even in college age, and we have these strong handwriting skills, spelling skills, we kind of write a little, we change it. We might scrap the whole paragraph now that we have Google, like get rid of the whole thing, start over. But it's really more of a cycle. However, knowing that study of the writing process that we have always, myself included, leaned on to say, well, if you can plan and you can draft and you can review and you can write, then you're a writer. Well, that's so not true, because there are all of these foundational writing skills that have to be explicitly taught in order for kids to be successful in writing longer pieces of text. And just to think about a transcription skill as easy as this, have you seen a program that teaches indenting? I have yet to see that. Unless a teacher teaches it, doesn't happen. How about when to break a word into parts at the end of a line or where the margin shows up? I see a lot of kids write digits or bigger numbers like 6,000, 6 million, and they put the 6 on one line and do a return sweep and all the zeros follow on the next line. Well, that's not okay. Again, where does that show up in standards? Where does that show up in our programs, in our instruction? And unless somebody's cognizant about teaching that, and let's face it, teaching writing is scary. And if we don't like something in education as a teacher, we tend to avoid it. We tend to check a box and move on, right? That's not a dig on anybody. We are all guilty of it. And when I say that in front of audiences, people will laugh. So this process, this writing process that we use as early as kindergarten, came out of a study that was done on college-age students that assumes these necessary foundational skills. No wonder why we haven't been doing the best job that we can do, because we didn't have the knowledge. We didn't have this information in our hands. I didn't anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you yourself are not a writer, sometimes you're not even aware of all of the different elements that go into it.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned before, if that's not the teacher's thing, it's definitely not happening. And thinking to even handwriting, when I was a literacy coach, a lot of times we would look at different classroom environments, and this teacher skipped handwriting altogether, and this teacher just did handwriting willy-nilly. And sometimes it was just like handwriting was the first thing to go from the schedule, and there wasn't enough time for handwriting, so they just didn't do it. Or some teachers thought it was very difficult to teach handwriting whole class because of behaviors, and students don't come to us with correct pencil grip, and it's just a lot. It's a lot to manage. And yet, handwriting is so foundational and so important to the transcription skill. So is there any particular research about handwriting automaticity that we should have in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple of articles that I just want to mention. And again, I'm happy to share them with you to link in. So I'll talk about that 1 minute. One is Strengthening the Mind's Eye by Dr. Virginia Berninger. It's a great article about the importance of handwriting and automaticity. Another one is Handwriting in a Modern World by William Van Cleve. And then there are organizations out there that provide free information on the importance of handwriting and how to teach it, because let's face it, not all educators are provided with the resources and training to do this well. And like I said, if it's scary to us, we try to teach it a little bit and move on. So there's the Handwriting Collaborative that's out there. They have great information. Handedness Research Institute is a great place to get information. The National Handwriting Association, and also the University of Iowa has a lot of great information out on handwriting. And when we talk about developing automaticity, this does not happen overnight. And I'm going to define automaticity because I recently had an educator ask me to explain it. So automaticity means you do it without thinking about it. When we first start out learning a skill, and I'm going to equate it to learning how to ride a bike. We have our training wheels on, we get to the end of the driveway, And when you first start and you try and turn, you're afraid you're going to fall over, right? So you're kind of getting the gist, you're getting the hang of it, but you're not quite there yet. You still have to think about it. A lot of times we get off the bike, we pick it up, we turn it around. When we are automatic, we can take those training wheels off, we can get to the end of the driveway, and we can make that sharp turn and we never fall down, right? And we don't even think about it. We don't give it a second guess. So handwriting automaticity is the ability for a child to be able to form the uppercase and the lowercase letters of the alphabet without a model. Not having to take a long time to think about it, not restating the letter over and over again until it comes to us, not looking around the room for an example, but being able to do it without thinking about it. So that's automaticity, first of all. Now, there are some guiding documents. I know Ginger Berninger has a program called PALS. In that, she has some guidance and some informal assessments. I have always used the general rule of thumb of this. By the end of kindergarten, I like to assess kids. I give them about 2 minutes to write the uppercase letters of the alphabet without a model. So uppercase, they get 2 minutes to write the 26 letters. Sometimes in the beginning, I give them, double time, but I make a note of it because it means, yes, they can do it without a model, but they're not quite fast enough, right? The other piece of guidance would be Linda Farrell and Michael Hunter. They have a company called Readsters. They have an informal assessment to assess these things. And on theirs, they do this 2 minutes. And then for the lowercase, the letters that do not look exactly the same. So like you wouldn't reassess S and C, but for the 17 letters that look different for uppercase and lowercase, their guidance is 1 minute. So the 17 letters, they get 1 minute to form it, again, without a model. So the kids see the uppercase version, they have to write the lowercase version of the letter. And so that's a little bit of a guidance. Now, there are places that you can go to. Steve Graham has a book out. He's got some guidance in there for automaticity of handwriting. Like I said, Dr. Berninger in her program called PALS, they have some guidance with an informal assessment. But generally speaking, that's kind of what I do in schools to get a free informal assessment to say, hey, they're on track to doing this well, or we need to step back and they need more practice. Generally speaking, the research tells us that it takes approximately 2 years to automatize a handwriting type, whether it be manuscript or cursive. And that is with 5 to 10 minutes of practice every day with adult feedback in the room. Somebody who's trained and on kids like Flynn, really being a thorn in their side, basically, until they get it down.
And I think that feedback piece is so critical because so many times we have these beautiful handwriting books and go trace your letters and then make as many other letters as you can and circle your best one, checking their letter formation. Right now, my older daughter, she's in pre-K, and sometimes I say she's drawing the letters. I said, you're drawing it, you're not writing it. You're making it in a way that you think it looks and going top to bottom. Or when she was making her lowercase e, which is in her name, she was making a C from the bottom, swooping up, and then
drawing a line. Yes.
And so we would go through these letter chants that I would just make up and said, okay, we're going to go straight line across, circle back. This is a circle back letter, circle back, circle back. So she's getting in that stroke motion to circle back, even with her letter D, and learning the strokes that it takes to make those letters, because then bad habits form and they're hard to break.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Those strokes that you mentioned are critical even before you start teaching the kids how to form the letters, because that, again, that foundational skill, everything has a foundational start, right? And those strokes are going to be critical, not only in forming these E's with a backward swoop, right? That curve. However, it's also going to be critical to form shapes. And let's face it, kids have to draw triangles and all different types of shapes and angles all throughout high school. Even when you think about a chemistry class, when you're talking about the meniscus in a beaker, they've got to draw a stroke, right? To show where that, line is not straight across. It's kind of curved and you read from the bottom of the line, right? I'm going back to high school chemistry, but you get the point. This isn't just about today. This is a lifelong skill they're going to be applying across subjects in their schooling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Arrows and any annotations, like it all starts back with those handwriting strokes. That's so
Yes.
important. I love what you mentioned about giving that 2-minute time to write out the alphabet without a model. When I was a reading interventionist, occasionally we would do that as a warm up. Okay, take out your notebook. Let's write the alphabet and let's
Yes.
do it. And then, oh, what a silly thing to practice. Writing the alphabet in second grade. Come on. But we need to get efficient at this. And the efficiency in that letter formation is what's going to bring about those later compositional skills that's going to be necessary to compose a piece. So, everything's meaningful. And even if the simple things are meaningful.
Yeah. Michelle, I really appreciate you just said that you did that as a coach and in the classrooms and bringing that to the teachers. We do a lot of really good things in instruction in mathematics that do not always carry over to the literacy world. So if I think about just a teacher who says, draw a number line and write the numbers from 20 to 40 by twos, right? So we're counting by twos. We create our number line and they're doing skip counting or counting forward and backward, right? We need to apply that same knowledge in number recognition, number automaticity, counting forward and backward to the alphabet, because those numbers are the alphabet for mathematical language, and our printed alphabet is the language for words, sentences, and discourse and paragraph writing, So we have to be more cognizant of what we're doing in these foundational writing skills and stop jumping so far up to the abstract without giving kids the concrete knowledge that they need to become proficient and skilled writers. I really think this is what's holding our students back and our teachers, because we're not making the connection between the two, right? We're seeing these things in boxes or silos.
Yeah, the silos. And students aren't automatically going to transfer the skill. We have to be explicit about the transfer and giving them the direction in how this works in another area too. And I'm thinking even teachers who do dictation practice in phonics, and sometimes they're like, oh, we can't get through this many words because it takes them so long. Well, why does it take them so long? Because they can't form their letters sometimes.
Yeah. And sometimes these kids can't retrieve the letter. I watched a first grader in the back of the room one day during a dictation assessment, and that child must have said the first letter in the word 8 times, 10 times, just kept saying it. So I don't remember the letter, but maybe it was M, said M, M. The child knew orally how to spell that, could have passed it in a spelling bee. But because the child had to write it on paper, couldn't recall it, got the word wrong. And then got the next one wrong because they were so fixated on figuring out the one that they were stuck on, right? How sad is that? So they had a body of knowledge, but what is that dictation test doing? Is it assessing spelling, or is it assessing spelling and writing? We really have to think about what we're doing with these assessments and how we're utilizing them.
And that goes back to the not so simple view again, because that's involving the executive function, and now the cognitive flow is starting to explode.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Spot on.
And I'm also thinking back, I'm sure this can resonate with a lot of teachers. We give students opportunities in phonics to experiment with words, whether it's word chaining or word building. And I've had so many experiences where you give students magnetic tiles and they're able to build the words so nicely. And then when you do the same exact activity with pen to paper, pencil to paper, and it's time to write it, they totally flop. And it just reminds me that mental model piece, like, oh, sometimes they need the model to look at the letter. They don't remember how to make the letter, and it falls apart because here they have a tangible one they're able to manipulate, but actually forming it is tricky.
Yeah, I love that you just shared that. I've seen that activity quite a bit in a lot of phonics programs and lessons with the letter tiles. And I always tell teachers to do an add-on, to do an enhancement. So if they're going to build a word with the letter tiles, after they build it, they should write the word on the appropriate paper, right? And as they're writing the word, say the names of the letters as they're spelling the word, right? Just to, again, go from I'm building it, now I'm practicing writing it. So, and we're activating that reading brain. That would be a great enhancement to everything that they're doing. Do less words and do your lessons better so that kids are getting the necessary practice they need to become automatic with this skill.
And I love how you mentioned the appropriate paper piece, because now Whiteboards are all the craze in the classrooms, and they're fabulous. They're fabulous tools. If you have a dotted line whiteboard, that's even better, but a lot of teachers don't. But students need that practice to make their letters appropriately. And if it's a tall letter, it needs to be tall. And if it hangs down, it needs to hang down. And sometimes we don't always have that effect on a mini whiteboard. And not to say don't use them, but there needs to be opportunities where they do have that formal guide in forming their letters.
Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody asked me the other day, how long do you need to use the 3-lined paper? And my response is until they're automatic with the skill, until they can do it correctly and accurately every single time, or 9 times out of 10, right? Because we all make mistakes when we're writing things, even as adults. But until you know that they don't need, then you can change the paper. So even if you were to go into teaching cursive, you would go back to teaching that using the 3-lined paper to show them the sizing and the shape and the spacing of the words. But again, it goes back to training and this knowledge and having access to these kinds of tools. So for teachers and schools that don't have a lot of money to do this kind of stuff, right? The University of Iowa, Clifter and Lifter, they're coming out with Clifter in June, which is the cursive version. They have free materials you can download. And if you don't have a lot of paper, buy those plastic sleeves, the page protectors, and put a 1-pager, 3-lined paper in there and keep using that with a dry erase marker. But use short, thin dry erase markers. I know that Amazon, if you don't like Amazon, you'll find them somewhere else, but they have 50 pieces in a package for like $7.99. So little short, thin dry erase markers, those will be perfect if save on pencils too, and they'll last a while. But there's ways around this if you don't have access to a whiteboard with those lines. Because let's face it, whiteboards are expensive. They're costly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the short utensil, and let's talk about it because that's another teaching gimmick out there. They want us to buy those big, thick pencils for kindergarten, right?
We love them because they don't break. They last forever. Bad news. Bad news. And I've been recently using this example. Imagine you tried to write your name with a pencil that was taped to the end of a yardstick. Imagine how difficult that would be for you as an adult. That is how it feels to have a thick, tall writing utensil, whether it be a crayon, whether it be a marker or a pencil. They are not good for little hands. Occupational therapists will come in and they break those crayons right away. That's what they do. They say the shorter the pencil, the thinner the writing utensil, the better. So that's what we need to lean into because this all goes back to fine motor skills. And unfortunately, in our society, young children are not doing as much of digging in the dirt, playing with Legos. Even the skill of brushing your teeth has become easier for fine motor because we have electric toothbrushes that are very affordable at Walmart, Target, you name it. And so they don't have to press as hard using their fine motor skills. So these are the things we have to consider, and we have to add to our classrooms to ensure that our kids are developing the right muscles in their hands to be able to do this skill of holding a writing utensil that we as adults take for granted. We really do. So hard.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes we look at handwriting and they're like, oh, the letters look so light or the letters are so squiggly. And why is it? It's because their fine motor isn't strong enough and we need to go back to the drawing board a bit.
Yeah. Get rid of skywriting. There's no research out there to support skywriting. And put in fine motor skills. Put in a fine motor center. Save that time on skywriting and do some fine motor stuff at the table when you were doing skywriting. Get kids to work on, one kindergarten teacher in New York City calls them the baby sharks, right? Work on your baby sharks. So get them to develop the muscles in the hands that they need in order to be skilled writers. It's not a long lost skill. It's an important skill. It activates the reading brain. I can't emphasize it enough. And Michelle, I'm just going to say one more thing about this, not to beat a dead horse, but we talk about state departments putting keyboards in. We know that handwriting activates the reading brain. And there's a lot of people who don't have this knowledge. They think that there's no research out there on handwriting. People will say there's no research to support cursive writing. And that is such a fallacy. Cursive writing, there's no BD reversal. It helps with developing fine motor skills. All the strokes start at the bottom. There's research to support that since it's loopiness and it never breaks, that it actually reinforces spelling. So there is a ton of research for manuscript, for cursive, and we in education need to do a better job supporting our educators so they can support our students with this skill.
That's such an important sentiment. I had the privilege of being on our school's INRS team for many, many, many years as a reading interventionist, then as a coach. And I remember one case in particular, it was a fourth grade student and the handwriting was atrocious. And looking back, this student probably had dyslexia and dysgraphia, poor executive functioning and all those types of things. And I remember one of the suggestions was like, well, at this point, just let them use dictation. Let them dictate their story and speech to print, and it's going to type it out for them on the Chromebook. But at that point, what the research would suggest, what you're saying, is teach them cursive instead. If the manuscript is not working, then go to cursive because of the ease in having that smooth writing and how good that is for the brain.
Oh my gosh, yes, you hit the nail on the head with that, didn't you? Yeah, it's so important. That would be like saying to a student, well, you're really struggling with reading, or that letter X is so hard for you. We're just not going to teach it to you. We'll have a computer do it for you. Listen, there's a body of students who absolutely need these technology enhancements, 100%. But we are not talking about the masses here, right? I remember in my husband's, he's a PE teacher. I remember in my husband's class, he had a student who was a quadriplegic, didn't talk. Everything she did with communication was through her eyes, eye movement. Brilliant child. Obviously, this child needed any sort of technology enhancement that they could use. Totally agree with that. She's not ever going to write by hand, but she learned all the same, right? I had a student many, many years ago that we found out had lead poisoning. Obviously, that student is going to need and have to have something for them for the rest of their life, something different, right? But again, we are not talking about masses of children. So we want to exhaust all possible attempts at teaching kids to write by hand before saying, okay, you're not going to learn this way. We're not going to give up on kids. We're going to do a better job training ourselves and providing kids with the tools to be successful. That's what we need to do.
That was powerful. Yeah, we're not going to give up on kids. We just need to feel better equipped to tackle these difficulties, whether it be tools or trainings or supports. And speaking of teacher implementation, I'm thinking even of different writing experiences that we give to kids and thinking about like how we structure our environment. And a lot of teachers want to go the flexible seating route too. And sometimes they have those beautiful little classroom students are belly down on the rug writing up a storm, and how lovely is it? And they're enjoying the process and those kinds of things too. But there's also research to be noted that that's not necessarily the best environment for them to be writing either.
Yeah. They have to be at a table. They have to be at a desk. It's so important for them to have their elbow on a flat surface, for their arm to be angled at a certain degree, for their paper to be under that arm, whether you're a lefty or a righty. And a lot of us don't realize that in order to utilize our fine motor skills, our gross motor skills are engaged. So when we're laying down on a carpet or slouched over, those fine motor skills are heavily impacted, especially in the beginning. And we're not giving those muscles and that connection to the brain the best possible learning environment. Really, that's the best way to say it. We want to provide them with the best learning environment to automatize the skill of writing by hand, these transcription skills that we're talking about today. So kids have to be at a desk when they're practicing these things. They should always have access to 3 lines until they're automatic. They should have margins. Somebody needs to be on them and be annoying about top down, left, right for righties and right, left for lefties. We have to know about all that and just supporting them to get it done right well and their handwriting grip. Right? We don't want kids looking like they're holding a baseball. I see that more often than not these days. It's very scary. And it's just going to impact their automaticity as they move up through the grade levels.
There's the tripod grip. Are there any other grips that are
Yeah.
acceptable, or is that the best one?
Yeah. So I am still learning, right? I say this all the time. And about a year ago, I always talk about the tripod grip, and I happen to have an OT on the Zoom call with me. She says on the call, well, that's not the only acceptable grip. Well, do tell. So there is what's called a quadrupod grip. There are others as well, but two of the most common are the tripod grip, which is the gold standard, and then the quadrupod grip, in which you're gripping a pencil with your thumb, and basically your pointer and your middle finger would be glued together, and then the writing utensil would lean on your ring finger. And really, OTs can look at the bone structure and the muscle structure within a hand and guide educators to which grip or what kind of grip would be the most appropriate for that child. I mean, this is their area. This is their area of expertise. And so we want to lean on that knowledge. But yes, there are other acceptable grips. We want to aim for that tripod grip, that 3-finger grip, but know that we have to be flexible in that too.
Yeah.
For sure.
And what do you think of some of those pencil grips out there?
Yeah, so some are better than others, obviously. There are a lot of really great OT sites to guide teachers into which ones are best. Again, the best way to do that is to talk to an OT. There's some great YouTube videos on the sock method to get those tripod. There's really great information out there. Like I said, there's a handedness. I just learned recently an actual handedness organization that talks about teaching lefties and righties. The best ways to support lefties, because lefties need other support. You guys, for anybody that's not a lefty, writing in a notebook, a spiral notebook, is painful for us. I say us because I'm a lefty. It hurts our hand. We have to get right by the margin. Part of our hand is up on that bump for the spiral, trying to get it down on paper. It's rough. So really pay attention to the types of writing tools you're giving to students very early on to make it as efficient and painless. I say that because it's rough. I mean, we get marker all over our hand. We get ink all over our hands. I mean, it's tough because it drags along. We can't always see what we're writing. And that's why some lefties write with that hook hand, right? That looks like Captain Hook. We don't want that. So they need extra support in this. And we forget about them because there's not as many lefties as there are righties. Yeah. So we're not bad, though. We can do it too.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
Oh, it's so important to keep in mind. We think about equity and access in so many different ways, and we have to think about equity and access when it comes to handwriting and writing support too. I think that's so important.
Yeah, so true.
So let's think on a practical note. When we're considering handwriting, what are your top 3 tips that you want to leave with educators that maybe they could even try in the classroom tomorrow?
Okay. So for early childhood, have some centers that are going to support fine motor. That's first and foremost. There are a ton of things on Pinterest. I don't always go to these sites for stuff, but there's tons and tons of great things you can do on Pinterest to support fine motor. Have 3-lined paper in your classroom accessible for kids. Have appropriate writing utensils for your students. Make sure that the lead in the writing utensil is a softer lead. Lead pencils, even though it's not lead anymore, but different pencils have a softer texture to the lead and don't require as much of that pushing down on the paper. You mentioned it earlier, Michelle, where you get it really light. You can hardly see it. Maybe for some kids, starting with things like crayons for the writing utensil tool, and teach your kids how to use margins and indenting, right? Keep that in mind. I know this is more than 3, but please don't get rid of the 5 minutes a day that kids need this practice. Find that time. It is only going to reinforce their ability to decode and also to encode, to spell words on paper. And your 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade counterparts are going to appreciate everything that you did. And it's a lifelong skill. In every class they're going to need. They need to learn how to do punctuation. They need to learn how to use mathematical marks, numbers, right? All of those sorts of things, mathematical symbols. So teach them those strokes, teach them the letters, the numbers, the symbols that they need to be successful today, tomorrow, and forever.
That's so powerful. And just to reinforce again how you mentioned It takes 2 years to automatize handwriting, and that's 2 years with those 5 to 10 minutes a day. So when we're not taking those small bursts of instruction, those small chunks of time to practice handwriting, it's going to be more than 2 years. And then they're going to be in third grade and yikes.
Yeah, so true. Last thing I'll say, Michelle, about that, just to reiterate, every handwriting program is going to need enhancements because most programs don't provide more than a day or two on a particular letter formation. So some kids may get it quicker than others, like everything else, but make sure you provide kids with enough practice pages to support this learning. This is something that parents can help with at home. It's not daunting and overwhelming. If they have the numbered steps and the directional arrows so they know how to start, they can help their kids formulate these things much easier than doing something like phonographing mapping paper and sound symbol correspondences, right? This is something parents and caretakers can support their learners with at home for sure.
Yeah. And what a great tip for conferences. And a lot of times teachers are thinking, what can I tell the parents to work on at home and do the worksheets or read 20 minutes and those kinds of things, but work on handwriting.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah. While they're cooking or cleaning or whatever, it takes a couple minutes a day. So be great.
Yeah. And so for the teacher who's maybe feeling overwhelmed about all of the components of writing, what's one piece of advice or encouragement you have for them as they work to support their students as writers?
This is going to be a little stereotypical, but I grew up on Long Island in New York, very fast paced. Everybody's in a rush to go nowhere, right? And it took me many years to listen to a supervisor to me say over and over, Amy, slow and steady, slow and steady. And really, that's education. Education is not a race. It is a marathon. And every single day builds upon the day before. And every single educator in that child's world is a piece of that puzzle, going back to what you said at the very beginning when we started talking. This is about building a puzzle. It's not a 1,000-piece puzzle. It's a 200 million-piece puzzle. And if one person leaves out a piece of that puzzle for that student, they will always be missing that piece. And it may cause severe impact as they grow older. So take your time, listen to the research, and then think about what it means for your practical implications in your classroom. And slow and steady wins the race. Really does.
That was so beautiful and powerful.
Thanks.
We don't want to be the missing piece. So let's all do our part. Amy, this was so helpful. I think so many teachers are going to feel inspired about handwriting. Handwriting and transcription skills often get forgotten, and they really are so critical to that writing piece because without them, then students aren't going to have that working memory and cognitive flow to do the more sophisticated writing. So we have to take time to get those building blocks in place and those foundational skills in place.
Yes, for sure. Well, I appreciate your time today, Michelle. Thank you for having me on. It's been a true honor. And I hope this gives some educators a pathway for them to feel a little more successful doing this kind of work with their students. I really appreciate it.
Definitely. And since you have so much wisdom to share, I'm sure listeners would love to connect with you further. So where can they find you and connect with you?
I don't have a website. I'm not that great with technology, but they can email me at amysiracusano@gmail.com. An upcoming conference that I'll be at is Big Sky in Montana. I cannot wait for that. The Reading League in the fall, Plain Talk in March, I think. But yeah, I'm on social media. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, just under my first and last name, nothing fancy. And I look forward to connecting with people and continuing to learn more. So thank you again so much.
Thank you. Yeah. And if anyone heads to any literacy conference, chances are Amy is on the roster. Again, she's so brilliant. So it has been a joy. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.